Yay! It's Thursday, it's the last chapter. Remember, we had the theme music. Can you tell what it is yet? Na 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 la la. It's a final countdown, or it's a final chapter. Yeah. Maybe I need to hire some musicians. Perhaps I shouldn't do it myself. Yeah, we are there. This is the last chapter. The final chapter of the Falconer's Quarry. Yay! 17 chapters. And it's the last one today. So, here goes. Oh. Yesterday, Joe's back in Lucy's world. He turned up in the middle of the night. He realises he's been called by Tobias, who had disappeared after the incident with the falcon, which struck Matthew. The talons struck Matthew down the face, and Matthew has died. In fact, he's died of blood poisoning, septicemia. Joe can't see how this is possible, but it is possible. It really is. It would still be possible today if you didn't get to the hospital in time. So Matthew is dead. Lucy has explained this to Joe, and Joe is about to set off to go and find Tobias, who has his St. Christopher. Got to get it back. And he goes into the Mews building, which is the building where the falcons are. He's gone in there to go and get a bow and arrow, maybe, because Tobias uses those for shooting rats to feed to the falcons. Or possibly he was going to get a knife for cutting up the meat, just so that he's not completely unarmed and completely unequipped, ill-equipped, and maybe even some different clothes, because of course he's in the clothes that belong to the household of Sir William Paulet, who have said now that they have no idea who he is, so he's an imposter. Anyway, he's gone in there, and lo and behold, actually Tobias was in there all the time, listening to them on the other side of the wall, talking, and has collected up all the knives, collected up the bow and arrow. Every possible weapon Joe could have taken, he has it. Joe has startled the falcons into flying up in order to cause enough chaos to try to get out of the building, because Tobias is otherwise going to kill him right now. And he's making a dash for the door when Lucy screams, "No! Stop! Joe!" Chapter 17. Hot, sharp pain burst in Joe's back. He stumbled. Out of the corner of his eye he could see the shaft of an arrow lodged below his shoulder blade. Instinctively he reached behind him and pulled it out. The pain blazed. He clenched his teeth to keep from crying out. For a split second everything went dim. Unsteadily he lurched round to see where the arrow had come from. The birds were flapping wildly, battering themselves this way and that against their jesses. Tobias was trying to catch hold of one of the falcons without being slashed by its talons. Beyond him, white-faced in the shadows, was Robert. Joe felt himself sway. He'd believed Tobias when he said he was alone in here. How stupid! Of course Robert was with him. That was how Tobias had known that Joe wasn't who he claimed to be. Robert must have gone to join him as soon as he was released. The boy put a second arrow to the bowstring. "Get out, Lucy!" Joe shouted, ducking as the arrow struck the wall behind him. "Go and get help." "You're not coming?" "Not yet." He dived under the workbenches. Robert had the St. Christopher. He was sure of it. What safer place to put it than on someone else? If he escaped with Lucy now, he might never get another chance to take it back. There was a second scream. This time it was Robert. He had dropped to his knees and was cowering, his bow on the ground, his arms and hands wrapped tightly around his skull. A falcon hovered over him, its jesses slack where they had snapped. There was no mistaking its intent. It was poised to attack. "Stay still," Tobias commanded his cousin. "Keep your face down and your eyes closed." He began to move quietly towards Robert. Joe watched the boy in the half-light. There was a silver strand around his neck. If he waited until Tobias got there, it would be too late. Bent double, he scrambled along beneath the workbenches. Shielding his head with his good arm, he darted past Tobias and flung himself at the other boy. The pain from his shoulder was agonizing. His fingertips brushed Robert's neck. There was the chain. He hooked it with his thumb, but he had to catch hold of the disc to stop itself, the disc itself to stop it from flying off. Then he felt the St. Christopher flat against his palm. He closed his hand around it and pulled hard. The chain snapped. Robert screeched. The bird dived. Tobias plunged forward. Joe rolled away, clenching the St. Christopher in his fist, safe beneath his body. There was a flare of light as the door at the end of the mews was flung open. In the doorway stood a figure silhouetted against the glow of burning torches. "He's here," shouted a man's voice. "Someone get these birds hooded before they rip us to shreds." Joe curled up on the floor. There would be no escape now. They'd seen him. But at least he had his St. Christopher. His shoulder throbbed. He clamped his hand around it to try and dull the pain. The fabric of his clothes felt wet and warm between his fingers. Gradually the commotion subsided. The master falconer must have come, because the birds calmed one by one as he murmured to them. Joe kept his eyes tight shut. "Good." Joe recognised Sir Thomas's voice. "Let's have him out then, and the boy too." Heavy footsteps quivered through the ground beneath Joe's cheek. All right, Tobias snapped. "I can walk on my own." The feet passed by again, with the sound of scuffling between the footsteps. "Who's that down there?" Sir Thomas asked. "Is he hurt?" More footsteps, stopping right beside Joe this time. "It's Master Hopkins, Uncle," Lucy said from the doorway. "Robert shot him." "Imposter!" Tobias shouted over his shoulder. "That's as maybe," growled Sir Thomas. "I'll be the judge of it, not you." Joe felt himself being lifted off the floor. Well. What in the world are we to make of this? Joe looked up into Morley's face. "Bring him out. We'll hear what he has to say in a moment," Sir Thomas said. "Easy, though. There's blood streaming from that shoulder. Staunch it with something, would you, before the boy passes out?" Morley set Joe down on the grass outside the mews. Something soft was pushed firmly into his shoulder blade. It still throbbed, but a little less, perhaps. Joe looked around. The sky was pale grey now, and the moon was behind a cloud again. The faces of the men were golden in the torchlight. Sir Thomas turned to Tobias. "A messenger arrived on horseback just a few minutes ago. You might have an inkling of the news he brought." Tobias didn't answer. "The pride of the English fleet," Sir Thomas said. "The Mary Rose went down before the King's own eyes yesterday morning, with almost every life lost." Tobias's eyes widened slightly, but still he said nothing. Of course, they wouldn't have bothered to send a messenger riding through the night to bring us that news if there were nothing else, would they? Sir Thomas raised an eyebrow. "There are rumours, indeed more than just rumours, that you and your young cousin have been playing soothsayer. Men and boys in these parts were warned off going, it seems, in exchange for good money, of course. Or else, if they couldn't pay quite enough, they were offered a look at an image of St. Christopher to protect them against drowning, just in case the ship sank." Joe saw indecision cross Tobias's face. "Have you nothing to say?" Sir Thomas snapped. "Everyone knows that ships don't usually sink in battle. It's fire that's the risk. And yet you predicted the sinking of the Mary Rose, which has led people to wonder, myself included." He paused deliberately. "Did you, in fact, cause it with your ill omens?" A look of panic came into Tobias's eyes. "I didn't make it happen. He told me." His arm shot out towards Joe. "He said he'd rather not go because he didn't want to drown. It wasn't me, it was him." Sir Thomas looked thoughtfully at Joe. "There's certainly something amiss here," he said quietly to Morley. "We'd established that much already." "But he's done nothing to hurt anyone," Morley replied. "We know he isn't who he said he was, and he enjoyed our hospitality for a few hours on false pretences, but no harm has come of it." "That's true." Sir Thomas rubbed his chin. "My niece here is evidently fond of him, and she's a sensible child. She has always shown good judgment." "Not always," Lucy cried out. "I trusted Tobias, uncle, but I was wrong. He'd befriended me for his own gain, and then he killed Matthew." She burst into tears. "That was an accident," shrieked Tobias. "I never meant to hurt him." "No, you meant to hurt me," Joe said quietly. Sir Thomas growled at Tobias. "I should turn you over to the king's men. They'll be here soon enough. The king is hell-bent on finding a scapegoat for the loss of that ship, and you'll fit the bill nicely, with your predictions of doom. I just hope there's room in the tower, lowly enough for the likes of you. You can await your execution there. I'm not keeping you." "No," Tobias shouted. "Please, no." He fell to his knees, his hands clasped in front of him, every trace of arrogance gone. "I beg you, take pity on me. I came back to Wardour because I didn't know where else to go. Without your protection, I shall be in grave danger. Please help me, I beg you." Sir Thomas shook his head. "I cannot defend the man who killed my nephew, even in error," he said. "My sister and her husband are in deepest mourning for their son, and will continue to grieve for many moons to come." Tobias was wretched. "Please then, just let me go. I promise you'll hear no more of me." Sir Thomas snorted. "Turn a wolf free amongst a flock of unsuspecting sheep? If the king's men weren't expected here before the day is out, I would have you publicly flogged and then put in the stocks for a week, so that everyone might know how untrustworthy you are." "Shall I have my men prepare a cell until the king sends for him?" Morley asked. Sir Thomas hesitated. "Where is this image of Sir Christopher that you were so happily exploiting?" "He has it." Tobias pointed accusingly at Joe. "It belongs to him," Lucy cried. "Until you stole it, it was used only for good. We have Joe to thank, uncle, that Anne recovered from her illness. And I do believe that if Tobias hadn't stolen the St. Christopher, it would have worked the same charm on my poor brother." Joe opened his mouth to protest, then closed it. He'd already tried and failed to convince Lucy that the magic she believed in was not real. Now it might very well save him. "Go," Sir Thomas barked at Tobias. "Go now before I change my mind." Tobias bowed his head in gratitude and stood up. "And my cousin Robert?" he asked. "I shall keep him as a hostage against any temptation you might feel to return to your old ways." "But, sir," Sir Thomas silenced Tobias with a look. "If the slightest rumour should ever reach my ears that you've been extorting money again, or deceiving honest people in any other way, I shall call for the king's men and offer him up to them. But he's done nothing. Will you take the deal I offer or not? If he's innocent, he'll have no trouble adapting himself to the ways of a decent household again, once he's away from your evil influence. Tobias swept his cap from his head and bowed low. May I beg one last favour, sir? May I be permitted to remain in contact with my cousin? Very well, but do not encourage him to leave my service, or I shall send my men after both of you. Tobias bowed again, turned and crossed the compound towards the gatehouse. It seemed to Joe that he grew smaller as he walked away, more so than distance would account for. He wondered what Tobias would do now. It was impossible to imagine him settling for a quiet life, toiling in the fields. His ambition was too naked. But he would have to travel a long way from here if he was going to trick people into parting with their money again, without incurring the wrath of Sir Thomas. Take the servant boy away, Sir Thomas ordered. He seems to have some nasty scratches on his hands. We'll send for the priest to look at both boys. We don't want another death in the household so soon after Matthew. We could use your St. Christopher, Joe, Lucy said. That might help. Joe smiled. If you like. He opened his hand. The curve of the disc was imprinted in his palm, where he'd been clutching it so tightly. Oh dear, Lucy said, the chain is broken. I know. I didn't think Robert would want to give it back to me, so I took it rather than ask. Anyway, it doesn't matter. It got broken when I was in the last world with you, so I bought 5 new chains when I got home. I reckon that would last me a while. He chuckled. What is the boy talking about? Sir Thomas asked. It sounds as though he's delirious, Morley said. I'd say there's not much point in questioning him about the business with Paulet until he's demonstrably of sound mind again. Joe suppressed a grin. They would never find him of sound mind by their own standards. Lucy took the St. Christopher over to Robert and held it up in front of him. I don't know why I'm even letting you look at this, she said, after what you did to Joe. The boy nodded meekly. He was looking a bit faint in the pale light, Joe thought, a bit fuzzy round the edges. He glanced at Lucy in her long gown and nightcap. She had the same slightly blurred look about her, like an out-of-focus photograph. Must be the dawn mist rustling in. Suddenly, he realised what was happening. Mist didn't rustle. It didn't make any noise. Lucy! She was at his side in a moment. What? What's the matter? The St. Christopher. I need it. Quick, please give it back to me. She dropped to her knees. You're not dying, are you? She pressed the pendant into his hand. Look at the picture on it. You have to look at the picture. No. Joe felt as though his voice was barely more than a whisper above the hissing sound in his ears. I'm not dying, but I'll be gone in a few moments. He was aware of the figures of Sir Thomas and Morley standing over them. You won't see me again, not in this life, he said. He reached out and squeezed her hand. But I'll see you again one day. We'll meet in another world. I know we will. If you could only remember me next time. He looked into her eyes. Please try, Lucy. Please don't forget me. She squeezed his hand back. I won't forget you. Not as long as I live. Oh, Joe, I don't want you to go. Not yet. Tears trickled down her cheek. If it hadn't been for you. But her words were lost in the darkness that closed around him. He swallowed and screwed his eyes shut for a few moments. When he opened them again, he was lying in bed in Dad's flat. You all right? Sam asked from the other side of the sofa bed. Joe let out his breath in a long sigh. He said. I'm fine. His voice sounded strained. A wave of sickness surged up inside him. He closed his mouth tight. He didn't want to throw up on Dad's carpet. Are you sure? You just made a weird kind of sobbing noise. Sorry, Joe muttered. I must have been dreaming about something. Really? I didn't think you were asleep. Joe rolled over onto his side. Already the dizziness was slowing, and the nausea had nearly gone. It was so much easier slipping back into his own world when he was in bed and could lie quietly in the dark, and there wasn't the palaver of everyone else running around fussing either. The St. Christopher was clutched in his hand. He opened his fingers and pushed it back under the pillow. Then he put his hand down the back of his pyjama collar and probed his shoulder blade with his fingertips. There was a slight lump where the arrow had gone in, but it didn't hurt at all. It was what he'd expected, but it was still really odd. A few moments ago, the pain had been agonizing. Now there wasn't even a bruise. For the first time, he wondered whether the muscles and flesh beneath the scars were ever actually damaged. Every one of the 3 wounds he'd got so far had been deep and acutely painful. But back in his own world, the scars floated on his skin like leaves on water. It occurred to him that the thought had phrased itself in a particular way. The wounds he'd got so far. There would be other times, other wounds from other worlds, he was sure. But for Lucy, this Lucy, it was over. He knew he wouldn't return to Wardour, and since she didn't remember him from one life to the next, the girl he'd just left would never see him again. She would turn 12, 13, grow up into a young woman. If she was lucky, she might live until she was old. But even if she remembered him until she died, as she just promised, he would be no more to her than a fading memory, someone she'd known for a few short days who'd appeared and then disappeared from her life, leaving nothing of himself behind. He could still feel the touch of her hand in his. How odd that the sensation had stayed with him when everything else had gone. He curled his fingers around where he imagined hers to be and wished passionately that she would remember him the next time he saw her. Where and when that would be, there was simply no guessing. At least he had done what he had to make sure it was possible. The St. Christopher lay safe beneath his pillow, his key to her worlds. The only thing he could do now was wait and watch. One day, when he wasn't expecting it, the key would open another invisible door. He would slip into her new world, and the whole thing would start all over again. The end. I hope you enjoyed it. That's it for the 3rd book in the Scargatherer series. If you are interested to find out more about Tudor times or anything, there's a timeline on this website. This is the series website. This connects you directly to me. So if there's anything you want to communicate to me, and you're watching this either on Facebook or YouTube, you can contact me through here. Somebody did actually just last week, which is really nice. So that's my website. There's a section called Haphazard History. If you go into there, you'll find a whole section on the Tudors, all sorts, timeline, famous people, recipes, something about the Mary Rose, various things, and stuff for other periods too. And on Monday, so I won't be back tomorrow, on Monday, sorry, it's mirror image as always, we're going to read this, The Demon in the Embers, which is the Great Fire of London. So if you've ever wondered what it might have been like to have lived through the Great Fire of London, I have also wondered that, and this is my answer to that question. So if you want to find out what that might have been like, I hope you'll come back on Monday. In the meantime, have a fabulous weekend in this fabulous weather. Bye.